Today I'm going to show you how to make your Necron Ophydian Destroyers multi-posable, and it's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, it's Necron conversion time, and I'm going to be converting my Necron Ophydian Destroyers. I already have 3 built exactly like the instruction book says, which is only one way because these miniatures are not multi-posable. That's what I want to do with my next 3, because I want a unit of 6 and I want them all to look different. However, just like my Indomitus conversion videos, which I did, which is linked up in the description below if you want to check them out, I want to do these conversions without using any extra bits, so just with what you get in the box, because, well, I know a lot of you are just beginners and you probably don't have a big stash of Necron bits to do conversions. So that's what we're going to do today, so let's do it. Okay, so here are my 3 original miniatures all built, well, with the exception of gluing the top to the bottom. And the main reason I left that off was for painting purposes. I just felt it would be easier to paint, especially the bottom of these blades, when they weren't glued together. So I'll glue them together after I've painted them. And as I said, these were built exactly like the instruction book says. Now, I have been working on my next 3 miniatures. I've clipped them off of the sprue and I've cleaned up all of the mould lines just to make this video a little bit easier. And I'm going to just run over what exactly I've done so far, just to try and make things a little bit different. So we're starting off with the first instruction here, which is this section where you already have a choice of 3 top sections. These aren't actually that different from each other. They are slightly in a different position with the arms, so that the arms end up being slightly different on each model. And then you've got the neck piece which goes on, which actually is different. It makes the head rotate either to the left, to the right, or in a more central position. So I have, let's get these out, built these, and what I've done is I've carefully positioned them to match up with these miniatures here. So I've used the same body, but I used a different neck piece for this one, so that I know it's going to be slightly different from that one. And again, this one here the same as this one, but a different neck piece, and this one with a different neck piece on that one. I've also used, because it comes with 6 different head options, I've used a different head option from each one. So each one will have a different head, and these here, although they're the same bodies, they will have a different head angle. So a good start. Right, next up is the claws here. So I've actually built my claws and glued them together exactly like the instruction book. However, I'm also having a bit of a change. Now, there's actually 3 different claw types with this kit. You've got a single long claw, you've got these smaller claws, and then you've got sort of medium claws. What I did is I used the small claws for the big weapon. What's the big weapon called, babe?
I have no idea.
No idea, eh? What a letdown. The Hyperphase Reap blade. I thought that the smaller claws would emphasise the bigger blade more than if I had, say, the big claws on there with the big blade. So that was my sort of idea. So I wanted to keep the small claws on the big blade on the next set. So what I've done is, let's have a quick look in my box. So I've got a box with everything all in position, just as I bring it into the video. So we've got those claws there, matching with the single claw, so we know it's slightly different. And then I put the single claws here, matching with the small claws. And then we've got the small claws over here, where you've got the medium claws there. And I know the small claws, of course, are going to have the big blade, so that's a given. And then I just made sure that the blades for these were different than the model there. So we end up with different weapons, different arms on each of the miniature. Now, in terms of the position of the arms, well, this is going to be an easy fix, because all we need to do is cut off the little sort of square section where it tells you exactly where it goes into the hole. And without that's there, we're going to be able to reposition it. So we're going to have full freedom of moving these about when it comes to gluing them. However, before we glue these things, we want to look at something else. And that is the bottom of the miniatures. Now, you may have noticed that I've glued this section onto the bottom of the towel rather than onto here, just like the instruction book tells you to. And the reason for that is when you glue this section onto here, it's a fixed position. However, when you glue it onto the body, there's room to rotate it, and I just felt it was easier to rotate it in this gluing stage rather than when you've got it on the body without the towel. It's easier to see the whole thing in its pose. So we have 3 towels, and of course these are exactly the same on all 3 miniatures, and I think this is the section where the model really is going to look exactly the same. Even if we sort of rotate this in a different position and put the arms and the swords in different positions, it's still going to look quite similar because of the towels. So we're going to start from the bottom of the miniature and work our way upwards. We're going to work on the towels. Okay, so I've had a good think about these towels, and actually I've had a closer look at these as well. Now, going forward for maybe a slightly more advanced conversion, which I will do with my next set of 6, because in this video I don't want to use any other bits apart from what you get in the kit, but my next set I will use other bits from my bits box. But actually it's quite clear you could potentially cut the whole of the towel off the piece of terrain which they're supplied with, and then mount them on a different piece of terrain. Now, we could potentially cut them off of this piece of terrain and mount them in a different position on this piece of terrain. That is one option. And the other option is just to basically cut away some of this terrain and just make it look different. So we could cut this girder off here, we could maybe cut this section off here and just sort of mix them up a bit, maybe cut this section off of this one, and just make them look a little bit different. And if you wanted to do a real basic conversion, that's probably the way to go. Now, don't forget, of course, we've got the plasma sight as well in this kit, and we don't want 2 plasma sights to be exactly the same. So I was thinking this one here where we've got this sort of area, I was thinking of taking this one off of this and then taking the plasma sight off of this one and switching it around. So put the Ophydian on that section where the plasma sight is, and then put the plasma sight onto this piece of terrain. We could maybe change it slightly as well. So that was one option that I was thinking of. We could potentially do that with this one instead. So that could be another option. But just sort of have a good think about how you might go about changing these areas. Now, in terms of the towels, I'm also going to cut and rotate the towel around so that the whole model is in a totally different position, but I don't want to do that until I've got the base sorted so I can really sort of see how things are going to look. Now, I haven't actually glued my plasma sight together because I knew I was going to be messing around with it. It's just a bit easier this way. So all we have to do, very simply, is cut the 2 legs off the terrain. So we've got a nice sharp knife here, and we're just going to cut that off. Now, it looks like I'm going into my thumb, but I'm not. I'm incredibly controlled with this knife and the way that I'm holding it. However, it might be advisable if you're not used to using knives just to cut it away from you. There you go. So we have the plasma sight off. We can clean up the 2 little connection points, and then we're ready to glue this together because it will be easier to glue it onto a new piece of terrain once it's glued together. So let me do that. Okay, so I've cleaned up that section, and there he is all glued together. I've also got the original out just for reference. So one thing which is quite obvious is, of course, it's got a smaller base, so that's something I took into consideration. I've had a good think about whether I should be using this bottom section or this one. I think this is a little big on here, although it's still doable. I could potentially just cut that section off and maybe use that elsewhere. However, this one has quite a curly small towel area, which I think once it's disconnected from this piece of terrain, it should be quite easy to connect it to this one. I could potentially cut this down a little bit, giving me an extra spare piece if I want to. But the first thing to do is get this towel off of the piece of terrain. So I've got the new version of that just here, and I'm going to use this little paint pot with some blue tack on just to help cushion the cutting with the model, because we don't want to break anything. So we're going to pop it onto the terrain, onto the blue tack, and then we're going to get our little sharp knife, and we're just going to cut off the Ophydian towel off of the terrain section. Okay, so I went through the first piece of plastic. There's actually 3 little joints. So that's one. We're going to gently do the second one. There we go, straight through. And the last one, just in there. There we go. Not quite, so we'll just do that from the other side just to make sure that it's gone through. There we go, so that is off. So we're going to just clean up these sections and we'll be back with some more. Okay, so with that cleaned up, I've actually glued it onto the bottom section where the plasmacyte originally was, and I've glued it into a position where obviously it's fairly upright and actually is the same sort of height as the original. We can see straight away we've actually got a totally different pose just from having it in a different position on a different piece of terrain. So that is just glued and drying. I've also been working on the plasmacyte bottom. So this was the section obviously off of that Ophydian that we just cut off. And I've actually taken this little section off as well. I just cut it and I just reshaped the bottom just to make it look as if it was broken, but still looking like one of these girdles. So I actually did a little ridge on the inside just with my knife. And I thought it would be pretty cool because I've got quite a few of these plasmacytes where their legs are always on the piece of terrain. I thought it would be pretty cool if I had it posed almost like he's jumping. So what I did is I got my file and I filed out a little slot, and this slot is going to be for the towel to glue onto. So I'm going to have it like that, so it's going to be a different angle, but it's going to be jumping, so we'll hopefully have 2 different looking plasmacytes. So I'm just going to glue that in position, let it dry, and we will be back. Okay, so that's the plasmacyte done. I've glued him onto the piece of terrain. I started to use plastic glue but got bored of holding it into position, so I just used super glue. And then I cut some of this surplus sort of basing material off around here and just reshaped it with a file so that I could sort of glue him to one side to try and get the plasmacyte in a central position as much as I could. So that is him done, and the plasmacytes now are looking very different, so I'm very happy with those. So now it's time to move on to the 2 Ophydians that we've got left to do, the 2 bases. So we have obviously this one here and this one here. I've had to think about how I'm going to do it. On this one I'm definitely going to cut this front section off just here, so remove that, and I think I'm going to remove the scarab that's on here because, well, 2 scarabs in exactly the same position is going to look rather the same. So I'm going to take him off, just cut him off with a knife. Now on this one, this is actually built in several pieces. We've got the section on the bottom there, and we've got this section just here. Now, one easy fix is going to be just to cut this front section off, so that's definitely what I'm going to do. Just going to cut this front section off. But I think this rock in exactly the same position again is going to look too samey, so I'm also going to cut the rock off just here. And I'm thinking if I use this section, which I'm cutting off of this one, in place of the rock, and then maybe put the rock over on this one in a different position, basically just switch all the pieces around. Plus I've got this girdle thing here from the plasma site, which I can have sort of coming out of the ground on one of these bases, just again to make them look different. So I'm going to do that now, and then I'll be back once I've done all of the work. Okay, so just a quick update. I'm halfway through doing this. So this is the original one. I did cut off that side section and also the rock just there. And then on this one here, I have cut off that section there. And with a little bit of cutting away at this section here, I was able to get that one to go right up against that side. And it's looking pretty awesome, so it's looking a lot different. I've decided that I'm going to put the rock that was on this one, rather than putting it on the other model, I'm going to glue it onto there. Now the actual tower itself is going to look basically the same, but we're going to change that in a minute. But if you're looking at the basing material, it's going to look very different. So that's that one. And then on this one, now that I've cut that off, I have this section from the other model which I cut off, and what I'm going to do, I've already scraped the scarab off. I'm going to cut this front section here of the wall, and I'm going to glue that in its place so that the wall looks a bit different. Then I've got this section here with the scarab on from the other one, and I'm thinking I'm going to put this probably on this side. I'm not 100% sure, but I do have the girder as well, which I'm going to have probably angled and coming out of the ground. And of course, don't forget to keep all of the little off-cut bits of plastic, because they could potentially... Is that the phone going? So yeah, don't forget to keep the off-cuts, because they can be quite useful just to fill gaps in where you cut things away. So yeah, keep hold of those. Right, let's finish this one up. Okay, so we are done. So on this one, I put the rock on the side there. Looking pretty cool, looking very different in terms of the basing material. And obviously we can beef that up with more basing material when we do the base, because obviously the base is actually quite big, so that will hide anything. In particular, this little join here, I can put a little rock or sand or something in there just to hide that. And then on this one here, so this is the original, this is the new one, we've got that little wall just glued onto there, we've got the girdle glued onto there, and that little piece that I said don't throw away, I've actually put here. It fit almost perfectly. I just had to shave the top off slightly. And again, we've got two very different looking sections on the base. The towels, however, are the same, but we are going to be changing the towels in the future. First of all, though, we are going to have a look at the arms. And as I said earlier, these arms have a little square section just here, and all we're going to do is just cut that off, just shape it into a circle with your knife afterwards if you need to. Then these arms will be able to glue into the holes in any position we choose. Okay, so that's all of the ball sockets just tidied up. I just clipped them off and reshaped them into a little ball. If we do have any little errors when we glue them together, we can just fill them in with green stuff, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So now we can just angle these in any direction that we like, which is really going to help change the pose up. So that is great. However, we now need to go back to the towels. So first of all, this towel here, where I physically cut it off and put it onto a new piece of terrain, when side by side, these towels do look totally different. So I don't have to do any work with those. However, the other two towels, they're very similar in terms of the pose, even though we've got different sort of terrain pieces. So we are going to have a closer look at these. Now this one, if I can get them to stand up, here we go. So this one, I'm thinking I'm going to make a cut around this area of the body and just rotate it, and probably rotate the towel, but I may not need to rotate the towel once I've made this cut. So that's that one. And this one, I'm definitely going to have to change the towel because the towel is quite prominent and very similar. So I'm going to change the towel on one of them and also on the top section. So we're going to start off with this one here, and we're going to get our little paint pot with the blue tack on. I'm going to work out exactly where I'm going to cut it. Bearing in mind that we are going to rotate it, I'm thinking it might be pretty cool if it comes round forward, so I'm going to cut it on that little join. So I'm going to use the blue tack just to cushion the cut a little bit. Now when it comes to cutting this, we don't want to cut it right in the middle. We're going to try to get the knife hard up against one of the edges, leaving that little piece of plastic in the middle intact if we can. Now if we don't manage to maintain that little piece there, it's not a problem because we could always use a little bit of green stuff just to fill it in. And for reference, I'm going to pin this as well once I've cut it and re-glued it, because, well, it won't be that strong with the little area to glue. So we're going to pin it as well. So let's get the knife into a position, and we are going to just gently just wiggle the knife until we've made a cut all the way through, like so. And now we have the ability to rotate it and work out where we're going to put it. But before we glue it back together, we need to drill some holes. Okay, I'm going to use my little drill. This is just a little manual drill with a 1mm little drill piece, and we're going to use a paper clip to actually pin these two pieces together. First we need to drill a little hole. So all we're going to do is carefully find the centre of this little section and just drill a little hole into the plastic. So take your time and just drill out a hole in both sides. Okay, so I've drilled out the holes. We're now going to get our paper clip and we're just going to cut a piece off. We want a nice straight piece. Cut that off and just make sure we've got the right length. So you're obviously going to have half in there, the other half will be in that area, so I need to cut a little bit more off. So let's do that, like so. Yeah, there we go. So what we're going to do is super glue this, because obviously we're super gluing metal and plastic together, so don't use plastic glue, use super glue. Super glue the pin into the body, let it dry, and obviously we'll be in a position then to super glue this half on and change the position. I've also decided I'm actually going to put a pin in the top. I've drilled out a hole already. So I'm going to pin the body to the top again, because I want to rotate it slightly in different areas. I think it just might be just more secure with a pin. So I've drilled a hole in the body as well as the top of the towel there, and I'm going to put a pin in there as well. So I'll do that and we'll be back. Okay, so that is all done. It's all glued together and dried. Now I have worked out I actually cut the wrong one. I cut the original rather than my converted one, but it makes no difference. The idea is to make them both look different from each other. Now I also just clipped the top of this wall off again because I felt it looked too samey, so that helps just change that up a bit. Now I've drilled a hole in the top of that body, and I've got all of the other top sections, and I've drilled a hole out and I put a little pin in there. I also cut off the little nodule which sits into the hole at the top of the body here, allowing me to basically pivot this body on the top there, so I can really change the pose up. Now the original 3 I'm not going to pin, mainly because I've got that locating nodule and the hole, so that's going to make it all glued together quite well after it's been painted. But yeah, I've done it on these. So the next stage is to go back to this one, and I'm going to do a very similar job. I'm going to cut the body, and also I'm going to cut the tail section and just pin them and rotate them so that they're in a different position, or at least do that on one of them, preferably my converted one, which is this one here. Okay, so that is all done. So I cut it there, rotated it round, and then I cut the tail there and rotated it round and glued them both on with a little pin. And we've got another miniature which is looking a lot different from the original. So all I've got to do now is put these into position with the little pin and then glue on the arms. We're going to glue on the arms so that they are in a different position from the original, and also so they look cool with the new pose. And here they are all finished. Now of course I can't glue these together because I'm going to be painting them first, so I've just blue tacked them in place, but I'm very happy with the work. All of the miniatures look different from each other, which was the task, and I've used no other bits apart from what is in the kit. I really hope you found it useful. If you enjoyed this one, here is a link to all of the Indomitus conversion videos that I've made, and here is a video that YouTube thinks you will enjoy watching next.